Great. Well, then we can get started, I'd say. Yeah. Okay. Wonderful. So welcome everyone to today's session. We're really, really excited and grateful for your patience. So as I said earlier, please feel free to change your name to include your pronouns and get comfortable where you are. And yeah, well, my name is Yasmin and I work for CKX. I'm the hosting and facilitation lead here, and I'm joined by Juhi, who is the manager of communications at CKX, and we'll be co-hosting the session together and speaking in a semi-bilingual way. With that being said, our captions today are only available in English, but if you need some whisper translations, Juhi is available to do that throughout the session. So thank you, Juhi. And if you are more comfortable with French, feel free to put an F beside your name and we can keep a lookout for that throughout the session. Yeah, so today again, we'll be talking about intergenerational communication and dialogue and activism. And we're joined by some really amazing guests, Marlene and Salma, which we'll hear from later on in the session. But before we get into the session, we wanted to do our community agreements as per usual in the sessions. If you would like to add to these, feel free to. I'll drop the link in the chat now. And I'll be reading them out in English and Juhi will read them in French. So feel free to follow along there. Again, this link is in the chat. So, community agreements represent a consensus on what every person in the group needs from each other and commits to each other in order to feel safe, supported, open, productive, and trusting. As we enter into dialogue and relationship with each other through YPC, we propose the following guiding principles for our time together to be reviewed and amended as needed to the start of each session. So 1, we are accountable to working in the spirit of reconciliation and decolonization and to exploring what this means for each of us. 2, we will use people's pronouns. 3, all of our experiences, ideas, and intelligences are valuable and welcome. 4, we remember our lived experiences are different and acknowledge that we have different experiences from others. We speak from the I and clarify from the we. 5, we honor stories. When we hear a story, we are being trusted to hold it, not share it, unless explicit permission is given. 6, we do not demand knowledge from others or answers to our questions, but enter into relationship and confirm that someone is the person to ask and is comfortable answering. We respect their no. And 7, oops and ouch. We acknowledge our mistakes and take steps to make it right. We make room for others to acknowledge if they've been hurt or affected by our actions or words. Thank you.
Thank you. Sorry, just to clarify quickly before we move into the French agreements, that for folks looking for closed captioning on the bottom menu, there should be a button that says CC or closed caption. If you click on that, and then you can click show subtitles. So I currently have them running, but if anyone else has issues accessing them, let me know. You might have to leave and rejoin, and if you do that, that's totally fine. We'll let you back in. So we'll keep an eye on that. The transcript and subtitles settings. So you're not able to see show subtitle? Okay. Maybe if you leave and rejoin, it might allow you to. It worked for a few of us. Sorry about that, Michelle.
Also, it is on the right of the closed caption button with the drop-down menu.
Thank you, Shanti. I'll go into the French community agreements, and if anyone else has issues, we can keep chatting in the chat to work through the caption access. Thank you. Okay. Les ententes mutuelles au sein de la communauté représentent un consensus sur ce dont chaque membre de notre groupe a besoin de la part des autres membres et s'engage à offrir aux autres membres pour que tous les membres se sentent en sécurité, soutenus, productifs, à l'aise et en confiance. En établissant le contact et en entamant un dialogue avec les autres via la communauté, nous proposons les principes directeurs suivants pour le temps que nous passerons ensemble. Ces principes seront révisés et amendés au besoin au début de chaque session. 1. C'est notre responsabilité de travailler dans un esprit de réconciliation et de décolonisation et d'explorer ce que cela signifie pour chaque personne du groupe. Nous utilisons les pronoms correspondant aux personnes. 3. Toutes nos expériences, idées et informations sont précieuses et bienvenues. 4. Nous n'oublions pas que chaque personne du groupe a un vécu qui est différent de celui des autres. En disant « je », nous parlons en notre propre nom. Et nous expliquons ce que nous voulons dire lorsque nous utilisons le pronom « nous ». 5. Nous honorons les histoires. Lorsque nous entendons une histoire, on nous fait confiance que nous la garderons pour nous sans la partager à moins d'avoir reçu l'autorisation explicite de le faire. 6. Nous n'exigeons pas que les autres partagent leurs connaissances ou répondent à nos questions, mais nous entrons en contact et veillons à confirmer que la personne à qui nous nous adressons est bien celle à qui la question doit être posée et que cette personne est à l'aise de répondre. Nous respectons son refus. 7. Oups et oui. Nous reconnaissons nos erreurs et nous nous efforçons de les réparer. Nous permettons aux autres de s'exprimer si nous les avons blessés ou affectés par nos actions ou nos paroles. Thanks, everyone. I'm seeing a little bit more conversation about the closed captioning in, oh, okay. It's appeared. If anyone else, sorry, I'll scroll through the chat to take a quick look. But then just, thanks Zoom, thanks Shalaka. Wonderful, so before moving forward, I know that some folks have already put where they're calling in from. For those that haven't yet, if you could put your name and your pronouns in your little Zoom name. If you don't know how to do that, you can hover over your video and then there are 3 dots in the top right corner. You can click on those and then click on rename, and then you'll be able to rename yourself to include your name and pronouns. Okay, wonderful, awesome. And before we begin, Yaz, do you want to introduce yourself, and I'll introduce myself a little bit and where we're coming from?
Yeah, so like I said earlier, my name is Yaz. I use she or they pronouns. I work for CKX as the hosting and facilitation lead. And today I'm calling in from the traditional territories of the Anishinaabe, the Haudenosaunee Confederacy, and the Wendat Mississaugas of the Credit First Nation, and what is so-called Tekaronto. And yeah, thank you. Juhi?
Thank you. And my name is Juhi. My pronouns are she, her. I'm calling in from Jojage or Montreal, the unceded traditional territory of the Kanien'kehá:ka Nation. And also for folks that are able, we have been in contact with some folks. Sorry, I'm just going to paste the link for the fundraiser here. This is for the Moose Moratorium fundraiser. Some background on this is that Quebec is continuing to issue sport hunting permits for 2020 in Parc de la Vérandrie, even though Anishinaabe folks have been saying for years that the moose population has declined. And last year, actually, as a result of last year's moose moratorium, also led by the Anishinaabe folks that lived there, the Quebec government went forward with a survey, and the survey came out and confirmed that the moose population has been going down, but they continue to allow these sport hunting permits. And so les Algonquins du Lac Barrière are calling for an immediate moose sport hunting moratorium so that moose can repopulate. Folks are currently preparing camps, checkpoints, everything. So please, if you're able, please do donate. And if you're not able to donate, folks have also asked, the organizers have also asked if folks can call the Ministère des Forêts. I've linked both the fundraiser and the contact information for the minister. And so if folks have any questions on that, you can also go on the fundraiser page. But that would just be wonderful if folks are able. And also, if you haven't already, then feel free to share where you're from, anything else in the chat before we move forward. All right.
Thank you, Juhi. Great. So yeah, as folks continue to enter into the chat where they're calling in from, we can begin our session today. So to begin, we want to do a bit of an introduction to what is intergenerational activism. So we want to start with a prompt, and this is for all of you. So what comes to mind when you think of intergenerational activism? Yeah, feel free to answer like openly or in the chat again, and I'll write that question in the chat as well. Maybe to kind of start that would be maybe like, had folks heard of intergenerational activism before the call or before signing up for this session? Yeah, you don't have to raise your hand. You can just speak or write in the chat.
Okay, it's Michelle. So when I think of intergenerational activism, I think of not using old models of activism where I've been having conversations where it's very ableistic. And when you think of the movements or when you think of the walks, they're not really accessible or perhaps safe for individuals maybe with disabilities. And it can cause maybe a more danger or more like place for them to not continue their activism. So I think of maybe sustaining the way that they do things, and it is active, but in forms of like everyday life, as opposed to just looking at you know, I'm going to work really hard on one thing and then it won't last, and kind of going back to like your own values and your own purpose.
Awesome. Thank you for sharing. We also have Isabelle, who shared that it's a new concept, Géraldine, who shared, and I'll translate into English, but speaking about us at all the layers of the population touched by a situation or an issue. And another point that we were chatting about a little bit, Yaz and I, was just about the collaboration in change work between generations on a shared goal.
Yeah. Are there any other folks who'd like to share before we move on? Well, we can, again, the chat is open, so you can keep thinking about that. But I'll pass it over to Juhi to kind of talk about the barriers to intergenerational activism.
Awesome, thank you. So a little bit about barriers to intergenerational activism. We were thinking in terms of, we identify in terms of two kind of major major concepts. So we have communication and the ways in which different generations communicate, as well as ageism and adultism. So in terms of communication, we have another prompt for all of you. Again, feel free to share vocally, or if you're more comfortable or can't, then in the chat. But we were wondering, what are some examples of differences between communication styles and tools between generations? So I'll put that question in the chat because it's a little bit wordy. But just basically, like, what are some things that you've seen in your work or in your communities that, like, what are some different examples of the ways in which different generations communicate? And it's totally okay if folks don't have anything to share right now, because the more we go through and we chat, then we'll also be able to kind of like hold these questions with us as we go along, and also as we hear from our guest speakers.
Mm-hmm. And we're seeing in the chat, thank you, Isabel, about technologies, virtual texting can be a barrier between generations. Yeah, these are all super real. And this isn't to generalize, obviously, every generation, because at any like age, people will have different communication styles and strengths. But yeah, that's definitely a large barrier that I've experienced with my parents' generation and like older generations and younger generations. And as I age up, I recognize that I'm also finding a disconnect between, sorry, there's a lot going on in my house, a disconnect between like what I know how to use technology wise. So yeah, thank you for that.
Absolutely. Awesome. And feel free to keep contributing in the chat. The next question we have, or not really question, but a little bit to think about, is ageism and adultism, and kind of what's the difference. If anyone has any thoughts on that, otherwise we can kind of talk about this a little bit, because this will be something we'll be talking about throughout the session. And Mike did share, I find attention spans are different. Does that make sense? Yeah, that does make sense. Do you want to speak to that a little bit if you're able, or just kind of, or does anyone else have any thoughts on that? That's really interesting.
Yeah, I've been keeping my mute off because I've got construction going on in my office. But I just, for me, like I'm not a youth anymore. I unfortunately can't identify it, but I do work a lot with youth, and I just find that, you know, with the younger generations, there's just different attention spans, and I mean, it comes with the fact that we're dealing with different people. And different ways of absorbing and acknowledging information. And so it's the challenge is trying to accommodate it all. Those who want more information, those who want it packaged in shorter, smaller bits. It can be very challenging, but also rewarding in some ways. So that's all I wanted to say about that part.
Oh, thank you. That's super interesting. I see a lot of nods and stuff. That's, yeah, for sure.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I think you spoke to a really important point about often folks still want to have that communication and have that knowledge sharing, but it's about how, yeah, like that is communicated and how it's packaged, like you said, that can vary across generations. And that just is like what we've grown up with, or what other folks have grown up with and normalized as forms of communication definitely play into that. So thank you for raising that.
Yeah, and it's also super interesting to think about the different attention spans, and like Yaz and Mike were saying, the different ways in which we kind of tailor our communication to those different attention spans, and the different like advantages and disadvantages of both. So really, it's really easy for us to often just be like, oh, kids these days like don't know how to focus, and like for sure, yeah, and like what are the you know, like what are the causes behind that, and how do we address those, and how does that even like ask us to think in different ways and ask us to do our work in different ways. But yeah, super interesting point. Thank you, Mike. And so moving on a little bit kind of from there into ageism versus adultism. So ageism is a concept that we've all often, you know, we kind of hear it thrown around here and there, but it's really interesting when you kind of delve deeper. Ageism is actually a bias toward any group of people based on their age. So that could be toward older folks, toward younger folks, and so it's just a bias to a group of people based on their age. But an interesting facet of that is adultism. And adultism actually names a focused system and its specific source of power. And there's an interesting article that I will paste in the chat right now, but it compares how in the same relationship that, for example, between racism versus white supremacy, where racism is a system of power as well, but white supremacy names the focused system and its specific source of power. In the same way, adults often hold all the power in most spaces. So it is important for us to acknowledge that and to think about how that affects our work as youth leaders, or our work engaging between different generations, or the work that we do and the wisdom that everyone holds no matter their age. And we will be talking about this a little bit more as we move forward. But does anyone have any reflections on that? Is that something that folks have heard about, or something that folks are interested in? We will also have space for group discussion, but if anyone wants to drop that in the chat, feel free, that space is open. And then I think we can move forward to introducing and discussing existing frameworks.
Yeah, and just right before we move on, something that just kind of clued into me as you were speaking about that, is the fact that like there's also a difference between adults and elderly folks, and like thinking about the ways in which that plays in as well into power dynamics, and knowing, especially, I think COVID has really illuminated the like blatant disregard for elderly folks in at least our society. And so thinking about the ways in which that's showing up as well, because I don't want to generalize adults into elderly because they show up differently. But thank you for that. But yes, so existing frameworks. So some examples that we were thinking about in regards to ways in which bringing youth into spaces that enable intergenerational like collaboration are youth advisory councils and volunteering experiences that often allow for again, youth to be able to like access these spaces and have that collaboration with adults often, or with elderly, or again, youth and children are different as well. So sometimes with children. So a prompt that we had for you is, however, often these spaces are often unpaid. So how can we question and challenge how compensation shows up in these spaces? Yeah, so we can oh, thank you, Juhi, just copied that question in the chat. So yeah, because these a lot of the time when youth are invited to be on advisory councils or volunteer, they're unpaid, so unpaid labor. And so we want to challenge that and question how can compensation show up in these spaces? So that's a question for everyone. Again, feel free to just speak or drop anything in the chat.
Je vais dire en français. Je pense que pour les espaces, parfois, les jeunes ne sont pas payés parce que c'est lié à notre éducation où les, les jeunes n'ont pas vraiment une voix à participer activement dans les discussions. Moi, personnellement, dans mon éducation, avant que j'ai commencé ma formation euh, à l'université, il n'y avait pas beaucoup d'opportunités de vraiment participer et, dehors de mes initiatives, mais à l'école, c'était vraiment structuré de OK, on va apprendre ça et ça c'est tout. Et je pense que ces types de notions euh, sont appliquées quand les jeunes qui étaient dans ces espaces, dans mon école, euh, allaient à l'université ou commencent le travail de temps partiel ou d'autres initiatives. Alors, yeah, so I'll just translate, I guess. But it's I was just saying that like I think that in our school, in our education schools, there's not a lot of space for youth to share what they want to say and what they want to do, and have a say in their own education, and having like a structure of what the hierarchy, like what things have to be done in my own high school experience. There wasn't a lot of opportunities to speak up and to share or to find, you know, your own passion and your own purpose. And there was a lot of influences. So I think that carries on into university education and maybe to initiatives and spaces essentially.
Yeah, completely. And I just put plus plus in the chat. So just a sharing. If you agree with something that someone said, you can put that in the chat as a way to, agree without interrupting. But yeah, that's super real. Thank you for sharing that, Michelle. I think that's something I think a lot of us have experienced at different stages. And that kind of also prompted me to think about sometimes when you want to share your voice and you have an opportunity to do so, you'll take like a volunteer experience or unpaid laborious like role because it feels like the only way to kind of like get your voice in that space or like get your seat at the table, which is quite problematic. And I'm seeing in the chat as well from Selma, often these spaces are unpaid because it's believed that it will pay off later. Exactly, you're speaking to what I was rambling about. And the ideology behind it is that experience will give you a job that will pay well and give you more stability as you get older, for sure. And Selma, if you want to, you don't have to, but you can speak more to that, but no pressure. But yes, agreed, for sure. So thank you for sharing.
Just echoing what you were saying before. And this is sort of some of the stuff that I've encountered where from high school up until university, you have to do all these extracurriculars. For one, getting your voice out, but also to gather that experience to have a great CV and so that people can take you seriously. And a lot of the times that is more laborious work. So.
Totally. No, thank you for that. And so that kind of leads us to our second like framework that we were thinking through, which is like the sharing of traditional or ancestral knowledges. I can't speak today. And so we were wondering what are some ways in which you may have experienced the sharing of ancestral knowledge in your families and communities. And the reason we're asking that is because we know, at least in like both Juhi and I's experiences, like there are a lot of different ways in which intergenerational communication shows up depending on like what traditional or cultural background you come from. So we just wanted to like add that prompt as well, knowing that a lot of us have other ways of knowing and experiencing the world. So I dropped that question in the chat again. Thank you for translating, Juhi. I can share a quick example, but I know for me and my family, so my dad is Oromo, which is the indigenous group in Ethiopia. There's a lot of strife going on there right now. And my mom is Afro-Caribbean, but was born in so-called Canada and grew up in like what is known as Cambridge, so in Ontario. Um, and so there's a lot of cultural differences between both of those communities, even though we're both like Black communities. So for me, it was really interesting exploring like, yeah, like how this like in like I guess dual cultural experience growing up has almost created a divide in the sharing of traditional knowledges, especially because my parents speak different languages as much as they both share the language of English. And so this is something I'm exploring right now and have been for the last couple of months is sitting down with my dad on Sundays and specifically asking him as much as I can to share his stories and his own reflections so that I can just record them for myself and have that knowledge passed down to me because I feel because of our family structure, once he eventually sadly will pass away, if I don't collect these stories and know my ancestry and histories, that would be gone with him. So it really hit me recently, especially in COVID, because my parents are getting older. So just really, yeah, that's something I've been practicing is making space for him to share, which allows his ranting that he often does not be so annoying because I'm like, I'm inviting you to share as much as you want on this Sunday, every Sunday. So that's been helpful for me. But I saw Juhi, I think you shared something. I don't know if you'd want to speak to it.
Oh, no, sure. I mean, similar to Yaz, like my mom's side, my family is Sindhi, so they're indigenous to the northern Pakistan region, and it was like similar like oral stories, and then like seeing how the stories changed over the years because they used to speak Sindhi, but then like there was the Arab conquest of Sindh, so then the languages changed because of Islamic rule. And so it was like seeing that, and then also the hymns that are recited in mosque, they are like in a different language, but then they speak to like the change that occurred when Islam was like made to happen. That made no sense. But kind of like you can see that history orally and through song and prayer. So those are all different ways of like connecting generations. I see also lots of folks sharing in the chat. So since the history of Black ancestry is not really taught in schools, my children are at a loss. Many would like to know about slavery and colonialism, etc. School curricula would be best to teach the youth. Yeah. And then Isabel, before I move out of Quebec, I did not experience knowledge sharing of traditional knowledge to non-Indigenous population. Since I am now in the Yukon, it is much more accessible. Gatherings are sometimes open to public, and schools' curriculum now educate young folks about this important knowledge. Yeah. Does anyone else have anything to share? Thank you all so much. Great. Well, feel free, the chat is always open, but basically just to kind of summarize a little bit and set the tone for going forward, we want to talk about how intergenerational collaboration can work for you, because all of our contexts are different, all of our work, all of our communities, all of our families, everyone is completely different, and intergenerational activism and collaboration is super broad. And so we kind of wanted to give a couple of like summary points for folks who would like to see something a little concrete to help set the tone in your brain. So what we've talked about, just as a summary today, just now, we talked about confronting internalized ageism and dismantling adultism in activist spaces, as well as honoring traditional knowledge and practices in our work. And so as we go forward, and as we hear from our guest speakers, Marlene and Selma, we'll kind of hear about how intergenerational activism, work between generations, has shown up in their work. And so I would love to welcome Marlene and Selma to introduce yourselves, and then in no particular order, whichever one of you would like to go first. Please, I'll invite maybe Marlene. I see that you're unmuted, so we're ready to hear from you.
I'm unmuted, I'm sorry.
No, that's great. That's perfect.
You can hear me now, okay. Selma, if you would like to go, you go right ahead.
The floor is yours, Marlene.
So am I gonna go on now? You know what I usually do, Selma? Juhi and Yas, thank you ever so much for inviting me on. This is a wonderful occasion, very different of what I've been talking about the last little while. It's so cool. I love it because it's exactly what I'm working on right now. It's called Ageism. When I usually introduce myself, I drum it in, so I'm going to drum for you guys. Like the heartbeat of Mother Earth. My biggest companion is my drum. I carried along with my feather that was donned on me at a talk in Toronto, an eagle feather. And when we went into the first COVID shutdown, I made sure that the first thing I did was I beaded this. And it's something I do a lot. When I'm not on my computer, I've got my beading section right beside me and all my books. So I will begin with Skyzate, Denizate, Zakuzate. Ladies and gentlemen and distinguished guests, my name is Marlene Hale and I am from the Wet'suwet'en Nation. I think as we all know that, I'm pretty sure that you're all aware that of the stories that have been going worldwide with my nation, with the Coastal GasLink, before the COVID hit. The actions of all Canadians came together when, let's go back to the date of January the 7th of 2019, when the Coastal GasLink company came to our territory of the Wet'suwet'en Nation, which is 22,000 kilometers, square kilometers of pristine land, and they want to put a pipeline through our territory. And the pipeline will go right through one of the most sacred parts of the indigenous Unistoten camp, because what it is, it's a camp that was started about 10 years ago by Frida Houston, and she put a lot of work into it. The healing center alone, just on that station, is just an amazing building. And a fellow came out from one of the small towns of Houston, BC, and he loved exactly what they were doing, that he volunteered to come in and put solar energy on the buildings, especially on the healing center. And he has to come in once a month. He travels quite a bit just to maintain it. And as we are all aware of the 2 years and that's been transpiring, with the actions going on from our hereditary chiefs to versus the band council, the words that came out at the beginning was the consent. And January or February of last year, I got involved. I'm a chef by trade. I live in Montreal. I've lived here since 2012. And when I got involved in the activism of this I started to realize, with me living in Montreal, I have access to two things that are really important. One of them is the media. And the other one is I've got lots of little troublemakers. And that's you. All my little McGill kids, all the kids coming from every university, college, high school, you name it, has been out there, have been with me since right from the beginning. NI Quebec was one of the first organizations that came out for us and went into solidarity for the Wet'suwet'en. I was at Dawson College that day doing a catering job when I was called on to come down and speak at this first gathering, when I did not believe that the amount of media that was there. And it was January the 8th of 2019. And when this came out, I spoke, and one of the questions that were asked to me was, what would I say to the Prime Minister today? I always remember that question because it was the question I would say to him that he really let us down. I remember the year before, and I don't know how many times before, that we were dealing with reconciliation. One of the most important words that we hold today is very strong. And when this came out, and when it was decolonization, right up to this year, we went from the Gidimt'en territory, and as we know, in the Wet'suwet'en Nation, there's 5 clans. I am from the Lixiliu clan, the Small Frog clan. And when this went through, it was one of the most horrific ways of removing our people from our territory for extractivism. It went through absolutely everything that, when the governments first gave UNDRIP, they gave, before that it was Truth and Reconciliation, it was the apology. From there, before then, with everybody going through the residential school system, which is my grandmother, my great uncles, my aunts, all went through that generation we're talking about. And when you're talking about intergenerational issues, talks, that's where it goes into my nation of where you are today. You're the 8th generation. You're the most important generation right now because you're part of history. You're a part of history that is going to make the difference into something that is so big right now, that with the COVID putting a halt on everything that has been coming to us, we've went through 2 years of just horror. When we never thought it was going to be could not be worse than this, it got worse. When they went into Unistoten of this year, just before it was what made it go shut Canada down, the images that I still hold was when the RCMP went in to take the matriarchs, right in the middle of when they were drumming, like I do. They were singing, and they had red dresses behind them. The red dresses signified what they were doing was bringing the missing and murdered Indigenous women home. Their spirits had to come back to the territory. They couldn't even wait for them to stop singing and drumming. They had to viciously take the drum from Frida Houston, and she carried on with her song. He smiled and he jeered, and it was the RCMP that smiled while he was ripping down the red dress from the tree that really made people so angry around the world. That image was what shut Canada down. They had just had it. And so from there, the 2 years, with the hereditary chiefs coming to Quebec, with Frida Houston at that time going to the September before going up to the United Nations, and she pleaded for them to get the RCMP out of our territory, number one, to get the Coastal GasLink to leave. They are still there today, even with this COVID. And for also that when she went to the United Nations, the biggest word that she dealt was genocide. This is total genocide on our people. When they did the film Invasion, I no longer look at that anymore. I cannot take the images, the sounds of drumming, and the screams of the women begging to be left alone, to get off of our territory. These are my cousins. This is my family. And I think to myself sometimes, my goodness, for what I can do from where I'm at now, I could be more of use to them other than going home and fighting on the front lines. The same thing was what they do. COVID has just put a damper totally on us really of doing anything more other than what we do virtually, and also the hereditary chiefs. I am today on almost still, since 2 years now, almost on a daily call to my family, my people, to some of the chiefs, just keeping and giving updates, what I'm doing versus what they do. And what can I do? I listened very, very carefully the last few days when the throne speech came up and when Prime Minister Trudeau again spoke about some words that we've just heard from the past. It's no different, that they're going to definitely deal with reconciliation with Indigenous people. And it's an old song. It's almost like what I heard yesterday was thank you for the pep talk, because basically it was just that. It's not going to go anywhere. What we really fear right now with the up and coming election, the memorandum of understanding was signed on May 14th between the three governments and the Indigenous hereditary chiefs to start the dialogue. If this election does go through, it will almost mean that we have to deal with a whole new government and start all over again. That means everything we've done is dead. We have to face that. We are not too sure. I know that the lawyers are working on to that, whether they just walk into the existing government versus the new one after the election, if an election does happen. So basically, in our favor, we are really hoping that an election doesn't happen. When it comes to reconciliation, I remember when the apology first came out and I was still living in Vancouver, BC. As a chef, I was making so much bannock for many places all over Vancouver. And the government actually called and hired me to make enough bannock for, with my students and whatnot. We were doing this we made about 2,000. And we were working from about 2 o'clock in the morning, 15 of us. And they all went to 5 different locations of where the apology was to be held. We thought we were pretty proud that this was going to be quite a day, especially because my students, we talk about intergenerational, we're involved in something that happened so viciously so many years before them. And after that, they engaged in many things of talks around the table. And when you were talking earlier, you're saying that where you have the circle of traditional knowledge. and how you speak about it. When I talk with Intergenerational, I speak with my students. We always sit at a circular table, a round table, and I hold a rock. When I hold that rock, I'm talking, you respectfully listen, and then I pass the rock on. When whoever starts, I pass the rock on. It's your voice. You're allowed to say whatever comes to you. And it goes around like this all around through the table. It really gives everyone the idea that they can have a voice. They use their voice, and they understand respectively to the ones that have just spoken. And it's the same thing as when we were children. I come from a family of 15, and same thing, listening to my grandmother and my mother. When they were talking, we listened. They would say it in Wet'suwet'en, and sometimes we thought it was, when we were 6 or 7, we thought, oh, this is going to be our punishment. The reason I say that is because punishment was being on our knees, listening to my grandmother do the rosary in our language. Took almost an hour. On our knees, we had to stay there. And we had to converse with her in our language. And that was before we went to bed. Every night when she was visiting, I cherish those memories now, thinking I wished I had done more when I was listening to my grandmother, who was putting so much work and effort into dealing of telling us stories. And those stories today are precious because they are in our history books. And the history book that was rewritten because the people, we're talking about technology when people were just either speed writing and things were not dialogued or written down properly. And so from there, some of the stories didn't come out quite the way they should, so they rewrote the history book. When the new one came out, I moved to Quebec, and I got 2 things in the mail that as living as a Quebec person now, I cherish, is that I received the new history book. In that book, I was named, and I was named Marlene Hale, that I was the one with a relationship with the food, the medicines of the people. I was very honored to be the one to take care of that. That was quite an honor. The second one that I got in the mail was my drum and the drumstick. And that was so I had something always with me. And when I was here in Quebec from home, it was given to me by an elder who I cherish today and talk quite often to, and ask him permission to use many stories, prayers, and I take a lot of the food ideas of what they did on the land, on the traditional territory, into the classroom. Skyze, Denise, Zakoze. Every time I talk is what the students, they repeat that over and over. Then when they are serving the elders, they get up and they introduce themselves. They say to the elders, Skyze, Denise, Zakoze. And the elders are so impressed that they're learning our language. And Skyze, Denise are from chiefs that go way back to time memoriam. They're the names of Denise. He was the last chief just before the Unistoten was taken down, and he'd passed away in December of 2019. Denise was there in the time of the UNDRIP. He was there. He was one of the witnesses of when they also signed many agreements between the government and Indigenous people of our territory. And when he left, he left a legacy for us to knowing that we have a lot of work ahead of us. And today we pass this on, and that's what you're doing. You pass your knowledge on. You never keep it in with you, because you're the 8th generation, and it's very important that your generation today is going to tell one of the most incredible stories. 20 years from now, people are going to be writing and reading about you. your work, what you have done in your community, how you have stood up as activists, young activists, and what you have learned through this whole process, and all the dominating world right now that we all live in. Today is, you just happened to be talking to me, is an anniversary, September 24th, where the 23rd yesterday, I was in Panama City speaking to 23 different countries, just exactly on most of the topics that you're talking about today. And it was listening to the Latin Americas talking about all their issues around the water, extractivism, dams, everything else. But it was the ageism always came up in certain ways where in different, let's take Peru, Brazil, Colombia, Mexico, they all deal with it so differently. And so for them to all share what they were doing in their different areas, their countries, it was really brought to our attention of just exactly how similar our traditions were, where the old meets the new and teaches them, and teaches the value of communication right now, because right now communication is very, very, very important that we learn all of this, because when it happened in the Wet'suwet'en Nation, and they did not want the world to know what was going down, they shut us out, they blacked us out. They have the power to do that. I was blacked out on my Facebook. They were blacked out in Unistoten, they were blacked out in Smithers. They pretty much bought our little town. They bought the newspaper, they bought the, we could not afford, hire a helicopter to go up to Unistoten to bring them food. They told the helicopter companies they were not allowed to have us as clients at all. We were not, they held every room, every hotel, every restaurant. This is how a big corporation buys out little people like us. When you're dealing with $67 billion corporation, you have a major big fight. But we have one thing that they don't. We have the world behind us, and we always will. We will find ways to carry on with our work. And I feel that everyone today working collectively, change happens, and we can make a difference if we want to have this change. And within the system of the political, which is really broken right now, everything is broken, but we can fix it. And we are just really fighting hard to deal with one thing, and that's our environment, our climate action, our climate change. It really goes into so many factors. It's like dominoes. If you don't fix this, it's going to hurt a lot of other things. And everything like the COVID just comes and hinders in your way. We just find ways to look after one thing at a time, one day at a time, 1 hour at a time. Right now, I have a weekly Zoom, a weekly webinar that I've been doing, and one of the things that has really been on our hot topic was ageism, elderly and eldership in our tradition. And the elderly, which we know is a pandemic failure. So many died because of the failure of the government and the care workers that just literally left them there to die. And so when that came in, we came in solidarity with the elderly. And now we find it very, very important for us to deal with the ageism and whatever disadvantages they have, we're there for them. I have an elder who phones in on my webinar, and he phones in every week, and he lives in Kampala, Uganda. And his name is Jeffrey, and for him to be up to speak to us, he is, he's an elder, so we know they don't have vehicles there. He has a low radio bike, and he has to pay for his internet. He has to go quite a ways just to be able to speak to us, and that's 2 o'clock in the morning for Jeffrey. So what we've done with the elderly, we've gone into, as they're saying, we're solidarity with the elderly. Right now we're fundraising so we can buy him a new bike, so he can still come and join us and talk to us and share things with us. The whole Zoom team just loves him. He's our elder. And respectively, that's how we take care of our elders. We find out he needs something, we take care of it. We've already sent him money so that he can have his internet and be able to bring on with us. And I would like to talk to you more and listen to more of what you're doing. So I'm going to cut this short, and Selma, I'm going to turn this over to you. Thank you, Juhi, and thank you, Yaz, so much. I just love what you're talking about. It really is important issues, and we will talk soon. Thank you. Masai.
Thank you so much, Marlene. Also, just a quick note that Marlene's Solidarity webinars, the information for joining on Fridays is going to be in our resource list for folks that want to join. And thank you again so much, Marlene, and passing it over to Selma.
Ooh, that was amazing. It lit a fire up in my soul whenever I hear these stories. Yeah, it's going to be tough coming after you, Marlene, though. I'm going to share my screen. I am going to try to. This is the first time I do this. So, hopefully, has it worked yet?
No, I don't see it yet, but do you maybe, is there a link? Maybe I can share it for you if it's not working. It should, oh, you know what? Sorry. I just changed the setting. Now try. My bad.
Okay.
I think it defaulted to only host when I signed out. Is it working now?
Yeah.
Yes. Yay.
There. Okay. I will present this. Okay. Cool. Is everybody able to see that? Okay, so I wanted to sort of just provide some visuals to the work that I do and who I am. I have a couple of pictures of some of the students I've worked with in the past and sort of who I am and the work that I like to do. So I used to be an environmental design coordinator with grade 6 and grade 5 students. The majority of them were newcomers to Canada, so it was such a great experience to have that space where I could interact with students, hear their stories, and just be around them and listen to what they have to say. It was a really rewarding experience for myself because a lot of the students had come up to me and said it was nice to have someone who sort of looked like them in a leadership role. And I still hold that experience very dear to my heart. After that year with being an environmental design coordinator, I went on to be a healthy living coordinator in the Cree Nation of Waskaganish. And there I was able to interact with older Cree students in the community and see what they had to say and their stories. And it was even more rewarding to be able to be in that dialogue with them. But through my work, I've really focused on how youth can voice their concerns and how they can have space to say what's on their mind. As an educator, I want to be able to have discussions with students and experience the world around us with them. So the systems that we have currently in place was made, in my opinion, to have power over young people, to have them prescribed to a certain way of being and thinking, to be a part of the workforce. The more control, the better in the eyes of governments and large corporations. And I see these shortfalls, and I couldn't just sit and accept the status quo being an educator. So I decided to move on and hop into the academic space with some older people. So now I'm doing my master's in education and society, And I also work as an education assistant for STEM initiatives with the government, with the Canadian Space Agency. So I'll give my age out. I'm 23. I've always felt like I didn't belong in academic spaces because of the level of expertise that was told you had to have. But in reality, academic spaces need us youth to engage with them and to be critical and to analyze their work and to hold adults accountable to the things that they do and say. Youth never forget, and that's something I've learned from working with kids. You make a promise, you better be able to do what you said or else. And it just reminds me of my brother Marcelo. He says I have to call him his brother, who was my professor in Indigenous spirituality back in my undergrad. And this still lingers on in my brain all the time whenever I'm doing work or whenever I'm out in the community. He told me that we have to act according to the rule of 7 generations to honor the 7 generations before us and to provide a good future for the 7 generations after. The effects of exploitation and colonialism still has strong repercussions today, and I've seen this in the Cree Nation of Waskaganish, and I'm sure it is everywhere. So to me, whenever I'm doing my work, I always center myself and think how my actions today can live on for the 7 generations after and live on after we are gone. And I love discussing about how we interact with one another, these discussions about ageism and adultism, and having intergenerational spaces, because it's something that we need. It's something that we need to mobilize. It's something that everybody has to be on the same page about. And yeah, I'll just give like my final thoughts about there's a lot to talk about, but I'll just give my final thoughts about what intergenerational activism means to me. Whenever I'm in these spaces, I like to assume the person that I'm talking to knows something that I don't. Regardless of age, there's something we can all learn from everyone at all stages of life because we have diverse experiences and we've seen different things. We need to understand that youth are smarter than many think and observe intently their surroundings. They know how to research and to be resourceful, and it's in their reach all the time, so we shouldn't assume that they just don't know what they're talking about. Elders as well and older individuals have had experience on them. They have stuff to share, they have lessons to pass on, and we shouldn't shun them or block them off for not doing enough for a generation, or we shouldn't generalize that all of them, my parents or all older individuals or adults just can't understand us, because we do have to open up our hearts to the fact that older generations have had to live with the communication of sucking it up mentality, and maybe they don't know how to communicate well how they feel, let alone communicating their feelings to their children. And I know that that's very much an issue, at least in minority cultures where parents are told to sort of suck it up and not communicate to us. So just being mindful of that upbringing and hopefully opening up that conversation. And it's much harder than it seems, for sure, than I'm saying right now. But this is, so we can't just shut out groups and blame certain people, because then what we end up doing is we exclude them from feeling welcomed and joining in on the mobilization for climate justice action. I feel like all ages, all generations should have the space to do the necessary work, and that we all have a role to play to allow that space for all people to work and have a voice and feel heard. I often seek my elders and my guardians and my parents to ease my climate anxiety, And I rely just as much on younger students and youth to fuel my fire to take action. We all need each other, and we need to continue to bridge those gaps for more intergenerational work. Ask questions, reach out, and participate in different spaces to make these connections. And then I would say to be fearless, be confident, and just be you in all those spaces, because you always have something to give. And people will for sure try to bring you down or tell you that you're not competent enough, but you definitely have something to bring to the table. So those are those are my thoughts. I will stop sharing.
Yeah. Thank you so much, Selma and Marlene. That was just, again, so powerful to hear your reflections. And yeah, like, again, I've learned so much from both of you and so inspired from both of you. And yeah, just I'm holding so much gratitude for you both. We were thinking in the next 5 minutes if we could do a small breakout, just to have some time to reflect in smaller groups about the topics and everything discussed today. And then we'll come back as a large group and debrief. So Juhi, do you mind setting that up? And I can drop also in the chat some prompts, but you can talk about whatever. These are just some things that we were sitting with. So yeah, that'd be great.
I've just invited folks to split into their rooms. And yes, we'll also post the questions into those rooms as well. I'll go pop into the 2 rooms and paste the questions in there as well. Folks that are still in this room, in this main room, you're welcome to hang out here. And otherwise, you're also welcome to go join your breakouts. Currently working, but that's totally fine, Melissa. You're also welcome to like sit in your room and like just listen, and you like if you'd prefer, but also totally don't have to do that as well. Welcome to stay here and enjoy our company. I'm just going to go pop into those rooms though.
Thank you, Juhi.
Thank you. Breakout rooms.
You got cut off, Selma.
Yeah, and so did Marlene.
I know there's just so much to discuss. But yeah, super grateful, sorry, about for all of the sharings. And in this last minute, if there's anything folks wanted to share before we close out, I would welcome, yeah, like any last reflections from anyone.
Yeah, I also just for folks that do have a hard stop at 4 o'clock or at the top of the clock, whichever time zone you're in. For those that do have to leave, there will be a recording made available, as well as a session survey that will be sent through, and we do have a resource list, which I'm going to post in the chat right now, unless Yaz just did it. But I would also love to hear the end of what Marlene was saying in our breakout room. And then I hear that Salma was also speaking. So happy to continue this discussion right now. The recording will be available for those that do have to leave. And just thank you all so much again for being here. I would invite Marlene or Salma to just finish up your thoughts from both breakout rooms, maybe.
Mm-hmm. And quickly, sorry, the next session is October 22nd, and it's Beyond COVID, What Comes Next for Youth. And then we also have a post-session survey if you are wanting to fill it out. But yes, over to Marlene and Salma if you have time and capacity to share, but no pressure.
Yeah, the sentence I was finishing off was, I opt to give out my age to people, especially in academic spaces and new workspaces, because I want to show or prove to older individuals that I can bring something and I have experience elsewhere and I've seen different things. So yeah, because there is that sense of, oh, she's young, she doesn't know. So that was just one sentiment that I was sharing with the group, and that, yeah. Marlene, do you want to go?
Oh, you're muted, Marlene. Oh, Marlene, you're muted. No worries.
Sorry, okay, sorry.
No
I was talking earlier, just going over traditional, when in the West we have feast houses, and in the East, in Ganawagi, they have longhouses. And when I was first invited to go to a longhouse, which you don't normally are here, in Ganawagi, it's not the elders and the chiefs that open it and talk it and close it. In our territory, where here, it's run by the children. It's run by the youth, opening a ceremony in their language, welcoming and everybody and all the speakers. And they stay right to the end. And then when they close the session, they close it in their language. And they thank everybody in their language, and they stay there and close the door until everybody's left respectfully. I really, really love the interaction of that. That's what I was mentioning before with Isabel and Juhi. I like your breakout sessions. They're kind of neat because it gives you a little bit more hands-on or interaction with a few people. Learning, especially where Isabel is phoning all the way from the Yukon, and how she deals and learning so much knowledge there from the elders, and she's really having a blast there, doing many things there. And that's about it.
Isn't it?
Oh, sorry, go ahead.
I was just gonna bounce off of your point, Marlene. I think it's incredible seeing youth and younger people do things their way. And as soon as we give them the space and the resources to do so, they do some amazing projects, amazing work. And I think just like in education, the way that I like to go forward with things is to allow youth the space to discuss their ideas, and then allow them or give them the tools to make those projects come true. Like with my first job, they had said that they wanted to build a garden for their school. So I opened up the discussion about climate justice, what a garden means to them. And they sort of took leadership over that garden, and they made a garden. They picked their food, they shared it with everybody in the school, and now they have the tools and the resources to go forward with even more projects. So I believe in younger people so much, and they do such amazing work, and they keep doing amazing work, especially now.
Absolutely. Thank you. Honestly, thank you all so much. The breakout rooms were short, but so wonderful, clearly. And we'd welcome all of you to, if you're comfortable and if you'd like to, share your emails in the chat with each other. You can also email us with any questions. I believe you should have received an email from us for registration, but again, oops, sorry, I'm on caps lock. At ckx.org for any questions, but you can also email me at juhi@ckx.org. And I'll welcome anyone else that's like comfortable or interested in like sharing, staying connected. To do that, Yaz just dropped their email as well. Really, really wonderful session and wonderful reflections. Thank you all so much. We'll hang back for just a couple minutes. Marlene also invited us to friend her on Facebook and also shared her email. But yeah, thank you so much.
Yes, thank you all, and thank you for staying back a bit. This was really just such an energizing and invigorating call, so I'm really grateful for everyone. Thank you. See you soon. Take care, everyone.
Thanks, everyone. Take care. And thanks for sharing and gathering us together.
Thank you. So good to see you.
Bye. Take care.
Bye.
Thank you, Marlene. Bye.
Bye.